Council. Today we have a very full agenda, so let's go ahead and jump right in. I am Susanna Davis, Office of Racial Equity and Chair of this council. And I think we have agreed as a group that we're not going around and doing intros.
Yes.
But we are making note in the meeting chat for those who are in the virtual meeting of who is present, and our minutes will also reflect who is present today. So let's begin with the approval of minutes. Our last meeting was October 3rd. And I'm going to pull up a link to those momentarily. Okay. In chat, there is a link to the draft minutes from October 3rd. I'll give members a minute to review, and when anyone is ready, I'll take a motion on acting on those.
I'll make a motion to I guess move forward with the minutes. I do see that there is one issue though, which is the people who are present need to be updated. There were a few there was quorum. So we need to make sure that the folks who are present are accurately shown in the minutes.
Got it.
And you mean
I will. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
You mean for October 3rd or for today?
For October 3rd.
For October 3rd, okay.
I think notably I was present and am not listed as a member, which is one quick fix, and have to go back and look at the notes of who else was present. But I believe there was at least one other and possibly two more council members present. So I guess
thank you.
I guess my motion, let me amend my motion, would be to table these and review them next time for acceptance. The rest of the minutes look fine to me, but that just that who was in attendance needs to be updated.
Got it. Thank you, Josiah. I will get with you to make sure that that's corrected, and then I'll add this to the agenda for our next meeting. So then next, in terms of AI Council updates, I know that we just briefly wanted to discuss holding an election for the vacant chair position. So I'll hand that off to you, Susanna, if you want to discuss this further.
Yes. So, hey, it's me, your only chair. Feeling lonely. Let's vote on making me less lonely. No, let me find a more appropriate way to say that. So this council has historically had two co-chairs, and we recently have had a couple of transitions on and off of the council. So now we currently have one chair, and we would love to go back to a co-chair model to make sure that not only is the chair role supported, but more importantly, that we have multiple voices in council leadership, and that we're really benefiting from the leadership and the insight of more people. So it would be really great for us to have a vote on that. I think that it makes sense to do it in December, which is our next meeting. It would be our last meeting of the calendar year, so we could start the next year with that second co-chair, which is great because it coincides with the legislative session. So that will also be a little bit more support there. And I am open to any process that you all would like to take. My suggestion, which is very uninspired, is that we just think about who we want to just think about it between now and then. And then we can just do a really basic nomination. Do you accept? All in favor situation. But again, open to alternate suggestions. Okay.
Seems like the right approach to me.
Anybody have tremendously strong feelings on the topic at all? Okay. All right. So let's all agree that we'll come back in a month prepared to discuss the co-chair role or roles. This may also be an ouster. That's fine too. And if anybody has questions about what the duties are or wants to talk a little bit more about what chairship could look like here, I am also available if you want to chat.
All right. Well, thank you for that. And I will make a note to ensure that we include the election on the agenda for next month's meeting. Then to jump into the next agenda item, there are a couple of different topics related to various new AI applications that I wanted to discuss with the group. The first one is pertaining to the use of AI within the context of state elections. I've been discussing this with the team who is responsible for managing our electoral process. And there is a specific step in preparing for elections that they go through called ballot proofing. And essentially what this entails is reviewing the design and layout of ballots to ensure that there are no accessibility errors or other issues with how the ballots are laid out, and then proofing and reviewing the content of the ballots to ensure that all of the candidates are present. There are no inadvertent admissions of candidates who shouldn't be on the ballot. All names are spelled correctly. Party affiliations are correct. There are no other spelling errors, so on and so forth. And then thirdly, they do some programmatic testing of the ballot logic to ensure that there are no conceptual errors with that side of things that could potentially impact the output. Now, currently, Vermont and virtually every other state goes through this process manually. Our team is relatively small, and going through this proofing process, my understanding is that this is a pretty significant lift for them in terms of the person hours that they have to allot for this process. Given that a lot of the proofing steps they work through are programmatic steps that we could do in an automated manner, working with the underlying PDFs. My sense is that this could potentially be a really good fit for building out tools to automatically work through some of these proofing checks. Obviously, not in an autonomous way. That this is an area where obviously we want to ensure that there's a human in the loop and a human reviewing any output for an automated system. But just again, given the inherently programmatic nature of this proofing process, it seems like there is a clear technical strong fit for automation. And we're still finalizing the details of what specifically that would look like in terms of whether this is something that we would develop internally or with the assistance of an external vendor. But in short, I really just wanted to raise this as a potential use case because there are some clear benefits to using artificial intelligence and more broadly automated technology for this type of application. And again, this is not going to be involving verifying or counting electoral counts or results. It's for verifying that the ballots are formatted and correct content-wise prior to elections. But even with that in mind, and given obviously the significant political considerations and complexities with respect to doing anything involving elections, I do identify some potential risk here in that, while this ballot proofing process does not entail directly evaluating the outcome of the elections, any errors in the ballot proofing process can still absolutely have a potential impact on electoral outcomes. And when it's a small team that's manually undertaking that process, the potential risk profile for those errors is different in my eyes than if there's public knowledge of an artificial intelligence or automated system that is involved in the process or providing input in the process. So I think that the balance between the risk and the benefit here is certainly worth considering further. But I will say that from a technical perspective, it seems like a very good fit potentially for automation. So I don't have any specific questions on this topic here, but I just wanted to raise this to get any thoughts or input that council members have. And Josiah, I see that you just raised your hand.
So I have seen this use case over the last few weeks as the discussions have been going on, and I'll just put out for the other counselors. My initial reaction to this was no AI in elections ever. Thank you very much. But then as we got deeper into this use case, what became clear is this is worth consideration because every town has a unique ballot. And so we're like reviewing that there's a core set of content that needs to be on all the ballots. And what this would be doing is making sure that that core set of content correctly landed on every ballot, which is something that AI is inherently quite capable of. However, because elections are really sensitive, we wanted to bring this to the council more broadly to hear about, in these kind of very sensitive use cases like this, what types of considerations should we be making? If the council wanted to say hard no, no way, the council could say that and that would be fine. But my expectation is probably that you're not gonna like dismiss this or any of the use cases that are presented today completely out of hand, but rather our goal is that we're getting input and feedback from you all on what should we be thinking about as we're evaluating, what additional information would you like when we're presenting use cases, and yeah, just any input that you have on this particular use case or use cases with similar risk profiles.
Thank you. Yeah, I thought that was very well said. And if anybody has any specific comments or thoughts on the specific considerations that we should be making in evaluating this type of use case, I would certainly love to hear your thoughts.
Susanna, Phil, John, like what makes you nervous on this one? Or what makes you think this is a great idea?
Can I ask a question? This is Chris Curtis with the Attorney General's office. So just specifically, like what problem are you attempting to solve? Is there currently a problem with ballot design? Is there an overwhelming hue and cry on the part of the public and public officials and the Secretary of State's office and the town clerks and a League of Cities and Towns all saying, wow, we have a system that's fundamentally broken. We need some kind of new tool to address it. This seems to be the tool we might want to deploy. Or is this just purely a hypothetical, could be any process, and this is just purely a speculative idea for a potential case use?
Yeah, so I would say that it's somewhat in between the two. I certainly haven't heard that there's an overwhelming Vermont-wide cry to bring automation into this process to fix the process. But we have heard in our discussions from the elections team at Secretary of State's office that that given how small and resource constrained their team is, and given the number of ballots that are involved in this process, again, because every town in Vermont has a unique ballot, the person hours and the time that they have to allot to this process every year, it is absolutely a significant burden on their specific group. And they have mentioned that the human process they undertake, while it is not a severe enough issue that this is notable across the state of Vermont, their feeling is that due to how resource constrained they are, and given the scope of this work and how important it is, they don't necessarily feel fully comfortable that they have the capacity to ensure that these ballots are going out free of errors. And that's not to say that an automated approach is going to 100% ensure that there are never any errors in ballots, nor is it to say that the work that they have to put into this will go from the significant effort that it is now to zero. But their team's sense is that this is worth pursuing because this is just really challenging for them to do every electoral cycle. So,
and I'll chime in here. We were not looking for this use case. This was one that Secretary of State's office came to us and was like, "Hey, could we use AI to make this better? Because this is really tough." And like that was the context for it. So I think that covers your question, Chris. John?
The only thing I would say, this doesn't concern me overly. The only thing that concerned me, it was when you were saying an example, are people wondering no, never? I'm against ever saying no, never. So, I mean, I think we can use good caution, but no, never kind of stops critical thinking. And I don't think we're saying that here. I just, the mention of that got me a little nervous because that is people's sometimes knee-jerk reaction to this new technology. So I have no problem with, I actually think this might improve fairness, and it might just be handled by, guidance that says must have human review.
Thank you, John. And yeah, I think the human review element of our code of ethics is clearly going to have to be a significant guiding principle here, because this specific use case, I am extremely wary of developing a system that would result in unreviewed AI conclusions within the ballot proofing process, making their way into the actual electoral process without human review. So we will certainly keep that strongly in mind. Susanna, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know if this is actually an issue that comes up in this circumstance, but I wonder if there's a possibility for error. I mean, yes to human review, and I think that I wonder if there's a possibility of errors with names or entries on ballots that are not common Western names or may not have Western alphabetical font ligature type situations. Again, I don't know if that's actually ever an issue. I don't know if people with ethnic names get their names misspelled on ballots ever. And if that were the case, I'm not certain that this automation would make that worse or perhaps make it better. But that's one thing I'm thinking about is this going to be something that has a English bias or Western language bias if it's trained in a certain way? And then the other thing I would say is I think I'm finding less concern with this specific proposal. When I think about equity and justice and inclusion when it comes to this, so much of it is happening before the ballots are even printed, right? I mean, we're talking about district lines and voter suppression, and those are all issues that are beyond the scope and happening at earlier stages than this. So I think I probably see this as slightly more benign because I think vulnerable communities' bigger issues have to do with the political things that are happening around elections. Yeah, those are my thoughts.
Well, thank you for sharing your thoughts. And I really appreciate you bringing up the potential impact of algorithmic bias with respect to any names or entries that aren't common Western names. And I will definitely put some more thought into that and consider this in our ongoing discussions with the Secretary of State team. I know my preliminary sense is that for things like spell checking names, that is absolutely a legitimate algorithmic bias concern. And AI applications that do this type of thing very clearly typically work better with Western names that appear more commonly in their training data. So is that risk of bias more significant than the underlying risk of the folks involved in the manual process being more or less likely to have errors in spell checking those names? I think that's a really important balance to consider. So I appreciate you bringing that up. Okay, and then I know Phil, you raised your hand.
Sure. I'm kind of curious where you see the machine learning or generative AI in this process. It sounds to me, and I don't know the process, it sounds to me like an IT problem, building a system that allows you to create these ballots and then to track that information. So I don't necessarily see where you're employing this specific technology. John looks like he's going to answer my question for me, so I'll stop. No,
No, I have another question, Phil.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So keep going.
No,
Sure.
that's because I don't see it, and that might just be I'm slow and old. So who knows?
Yeah. So on the AI side, you're absolutely right to raise that point. And in some respects, when I talk about artificial intelligence with respect to this type of system, I'm using it in the much broader sense rather than specifically referring to generative AI and large language models. So, for example, there are a lot of things that we can do to review and verify ballot design and layout that I would characterize more as IET problems than AI problems, the way that we can conventionally use the term AI today. So, things like verifying the layout of the subsections within a PDF, that can be done with existing tools, say using a programming language like Python, that are not strictly AI in the generative artificial intelligence sense. At the same time, there are elements of this use case that I do think can be facilitated by the use of generative AI. So AI models are increasingly getting stronger and stronger at programmatically extracting information and key value pairs from PDFs in a way that is much easier and it's easier to develop than conventional PDF extraction methods, and the reliability is similar, if not slightly higher. For other things like, spell checking the elements of the ballot, I think that while AI is not strictly necessary to do spell check, because that's obviously existed for many years, I do think that it can facilitate the process. So that's all to say, you're absolutely right to point out that many elements of this can be done without using artificial intelligence per the generative AI definition. But I still do think that generative AI will ultimately play a role, again, contingent on us determining that the risk trade-off is worth proceeding in that regard. John?
I think this might have come up, Susanna, when you were talking about this, but in terms of like other ethnic names, but in terms of gender bias and are there neutral names that if you were going to try to create a very fair listing so that it wasn't all the men up front or all the women up front, there might be a reason for being able to critique the ballot orders that are, to make sure that there wasn't, some sort of accidental bias in there. And those kind of things, unfortunately, are very deeply embedded in things like LLMs because of the prevalence of the, say words like Ashley or Lee or, the many names like that predominantly one way or the other. So that's an interesting thing. But while I'm talking, and I'm always talking, but I just finished reading a book called The Alignment Problem, and it, it's kind of not very technical, but it really talks about some of this stuff in a really interesting historical context. So 4 stars at least.
Thank you, John. Yeah, and I appreciate you raising the issue of gender bias as well. We will definitely note that too, because you're right to point out that that's a significant issue, of course, in the underlying training data that LLMs are reliant on. Josiah?
Yeah, so I just wanted to make one clarification to this use case. There's not a particular problem at Secretary of State's office right now with like them being worried about ballot quality. It was more uh, just a way of gaining some efficiency throughout this process, because sometimes there are multiple rounds of checks going on, and having that, you know, be a single round is really the goal of adding some automation to this process.
Thank you,
I think
Josiah.
Chris has his hand up.
Yeah, Chris.
Yeah, the
go
only
ahead.
other thing I was going to add is I think probably the biggest challenge with something like this, regardless of the particular use in terms of just a design and layout concept for AI, is that I think if the general public hears AI and elections in the same breath, they're going to freak out because there is so much concern about election security generally. So it won't matter. You won't even get to the place of being able to explain without a lot of groundwork having been laid to really assure people what this is, why it's necessary, how it's being applied, the fact that there's a broad public benefit potentially. Uh, I just, I mean, the Secretary of State can take whatever position they want to with respect to, coming up with new and better ways to devise ballots. But I think if the general public were to hear that artificial intelligence was being used and deployed in the context of elections, I suspect there would be a great deal of concern. And that may just be my own impression. I don't have any basis on which to have empirical evidence to support that, but I think we all know, all the people on this call know, that there's a great deal of concern about election integrity. So if I had to guess, I guess, my own view is always in these things, the precautionary principle applies. And if a change were going to be promoted or made, obviously the appropriate agencies would have to be in charge of those. And the general public, I'm sure, would have a great interest in any application of AI when it comes to this particular use. So that was my only other concerning thought.
Yeah, I think the PR component there is definitely something to consider, and I want to draw attention to Susanna's comment in the chat about animated explainers. Thank you for that. I did also want to, I know, Joe, you may not have heard the very beginning of this conversation, but anything from your side in addition to what's been discussed?
Not really. I think I agree with everything that's been said so far. I don't see, like, as far as actual bad things that could happen, this seems like a pretty benign area to use AI in. And I think I agree that, like, the biggest challenge might almost be that, people might misinterpret it as doing more than it really is. I do think that's probably a challenge, and I think it's probably impossible to really explain to people how the AI is doing what it's doing.
Any other comments on this one? I know there are a few more use cases we wanted to get to, but
the only thing I would say is, while public opinion and concern is a really good reason, those are not good reasons for us to back down. I'm not saying that this is one of those cases, but if you wait for public opinion to bless that, hey, I'm not concerned about this, we will not get full benefit of this, of the emerging technology. So I think Vermont needs, you have to have standards, and you have to understand that there will be public, concern. It's our obligation as a state to explain why we're doing it, but I don't think it should ever be a reason for not doing it. You know what I'm saying? That would be a really bad thing to run from that fight. Not to take it on, just to be ornery, but if there was a piece of technology and we really believed in it, and we thought that the hailstorm would be just too bad, I think the right thing for us to do is public comment, public relations, and then push forward in an informed way. If we back down at all of these corners, we're really going to be backed into a corner.
Quick devil's advocate on that point, I would suggest in this particular area, any controversy because this is a broad, fundamental public right. Any controversy in this area that sows concerns about the integrity of elections or whether they're justified or not. You can have as much debate as you want and say, oh, it's just an efficiency measure. But if people feel dissuaded from voting because there's a controversy, that's a huge problem. That's different than commercial applications. That's different than just governmental efficiencies for any other agency or division. I mean, this is a fundamental public right and access issue. So just the very fact that there's a debate or a case in controversy, if that were to dissuade people from saying, I don't know what this is about, it sounds pretty alien to me, I don't know why they're doing this, I'm just not going to vote, or they're going to take away my right to vote as a consequence of this. Or God forbid, there ends up being a problem with the ballot. You can imagine how that would play out. So just devil's advocate on that point, I think voting and elections are distinct and fundamental and perhaps different from other use cases that might be considered
would
in
say
other areas.
devil's advocate. I think a point very well made. But what if we're talking, and this is speculative, but what if this is a technology that actually enhances voter the actual quality, and the public is somehow needs to be educated. I mean, at the risk of being political, the current environment in terms of calling doubt on the election process is unconscionable, and yet that's not stifled. So I would say, again, we don't do it needlessly, but if there is a strong feeling that it is the right thing to do and it increases, I mean, you have to weigh that, but I would hate for us to say we'll always back down because there might be concern. And as much as I take your example, that I would say that's a slippery slope.
I appreciate this discussion, and we will share this with Secretary of State as we're considering whether to take on this use case. But really appreciate all of the considerations here. And if there are other things that come up, please do let us know. And I think, Miles, you can roll to the next one.
Yes, yeah, and I just want to thank you all for the points that you raised on this specific topic. In my mind, that this was probably the most significant of the agenda items that I wanted to discuss today. So I thought that this was really helpful. So thank you all. In terms of another application, we are currently rolling out a beta testing program to evaluate the use of a specific AI tool that is developed by Microsoft called M365 Copilot. This is less about this specific tool, but to give a little bit of context for what this is, it is basically a multifaceted chat tool that is developed by Microsoft, and it includes both a chat interface that individuals can interact with that is roughly congruent to Chat GPT or Chat VT. The main difference there is that this specific tool has access to all of the documents that a given user has access to within our environment. So for summarizing emails, or pulling information from SharePoint sites and so on and so forth. It's basically like a chat engine that's designed to work efficiently within the Microsoft ecosystem that we use at the state government. And we are beginning this testing program to evaluate usage patterns of this specific tool, currently including around 50 users across approximately 15 agencies and departments across the state government. This is going to be running for around 16 weeks through the end of February. And broadly, our intent here is to identify usage patterns that are the best fit for this tool to figure out how we can most effectively provision it on a permanent basis after the trial period is over. And then we're also interested in better understanding how the availability of this tool impacts the usage of other tools, and particularly the usage of shadow AI tools, which is basically just an extension of the term shadow IT. It refers to any usage of applications or systems that is not strictly authorized or sanctioned by a given organization. So what that would look like in our context for AI would be people using public tools like ChatGPT for things that they are not authorized to do within the context of our guidelines. And so on the first side, to figure out how we can best allocate this tool and similar tools in a fair and efficient way, this is something that we've been thinking about a great deal, and I think that the metrics and the insights that we're able to draw from this pilot will be really helpful for informing this. But in my eyes, it's a complex question because we are inherently resource constrained in terms of how this type of AI tool can be allotted across the state government. For context, this specific Microsoft Copilot, it costs $30 per license per month. So just the 50 pilot users that we have, if we were to continue those on a permanent basis after the trial, that would cost $18,000 a year. Currently, ChatBT, we have 500 users a month. So having 500 Copilot users would amount to nearly $200,000 a year in licensing costs. So obviously, this is going to have to be allotted carefully, and it's not something that we're realistically going to be able to provide every state of Vermont employee. And that raises some significant questions in my eyes in terms of how we can best allot AI tools that we're resource constrained to allot in a fair and impartial way, right? So as one example, there could very well be a circumstance where a supervisor is not particularly conversant in AI technology and may not even be fully aware of how their employees are using AI and what those uses entail. So if they have one employee who's using these AI tools and has had great success increasing their process efficiency and the quality of their output using them, versus another employee who doesn't have access to these tools, ensuring that having the privileged access to these paid AI tools doesn't impact employee evaluations or perceptions of work quality, to my eyes, that's an important question that we need to answer. And I know at our last meeting, one of the council members, and I apologize, I can't remember who you were who said this, but we noted that AI specific education should be incorporated in our state of Vermont supervisor training program, which is currently not being done. And I think that that's a clear educational gap that we want to remediate. But broadly, I'm thinking big picture about how we can allot these types of tools across the government in a way that's fair for all employees, considering that all employees inherently likely aren't going to be able to access every single cutting edge AI tool that gets developed that we have the opportunity to pilot and expand in a limited capacity. So I would love to hear any thoughts that you have with respect to these questions. Right now, we just began the pilot, and we're in the process of finalizing the specific metrics that we're going to be tracking over the duration of the pilot program. So any input that I can get on these points earlier to help frame the way that we're using and approaching those metrics, I think would be really helpful for us to answer these questions. Cool. Well, if nobody has any thoughts at this point,
wait, I bet someone has thoughts. Bill came off of mute.
Oh, we always have thoughts, and there goes John right there. So you're in. I guess I want to ask a couple more questions. So
yeah.
So you're doing a limited pilot, and they're making it available for you to check to see to test this to see if it has value for you, and you've put together some sort of set of metrics to determine whether or not the juice is worth the squeeze. So that's where you're at the moment. And what do you anticipate are going to be the value of this particular product? What do you think you're going to get out of this? What are the metrics you want to see?
So this particular product, given that it's designed to work across the Microsoft ecosystem and various Microsoft applications, I think that my perception is that it's going to be most useful for people who spend a lot of time doing things like summarizing and writing emails and other communications. So, to give a couple of examples, I think that a developer who maybe receives a handful of emails per day and otherwise is predominantly focused on working on one or a handful of discrete specific tasks. My perception is that that type of employee will derive comparatively limited utility from this tool compared to somebody who's getting, say, dozens upon dozens of emails all day long, and it would benefit significantly from having access to tools that can quickly summarize those emails and aggregate that information to draft responses and so on. So to say that another way, I think that the benefits for this specific AI tool will be most significant for more senior or managerial folks. And again, that is just my perception. But to give a little bit more context on the metrics that we're tracking, we are going to be tracking user satisfaction and issues and perceived efficiency gains through a monthly survey basis. And then we also have access to some really helpful underlying metrics regarding what specific types of prompts users are going to be entering, what specific applications within Microsoft they're going to be using the tool for. So, SharePoint versus Outlook versus Teams and so on. So my hope is that through the combination of those quantitative metrics that we can access along with the survey responses and just qualitative holistic check-ins with more senior folks who likely aren't going to have time to participate in the week-to-week sessions that we have scheduled and that type of thing. I'm hoping that we can dial in on that a little bit more, but that is my preliminary sense.
So I just a quick follow-up, and I'll give it to John quickly, but you do realize that because you're in a Microsoft 365 environment, that everything you do in Microsoft, if you open a directory, it's recorded. If you look at an email, it's recorded. If you open a document, it's recorded. If you search for something, it's everything you do in the Office 365 environment is logged and recorded. And
Yes.
So the power of what you're laying out here is the opportunity to be able to really understand with this tool how to possibly change or automate significant portions of jobs. If you can build the right sort of tools to be able to assess what tasks are being accomplished. I'll stop now. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I'll chime in on that one. So far, the tool suite that we've gotten from Microsoft doesn't include any of the log analysis to the level that you're talking about, Phil. But I think to kind of get at your original question another way, what we've done in ChatVT works really well for a lot of employees. But what Copilot offers is kind of deeper integration into all the Microsoft's products. And so there's a bunch of capabilities there. Miles has mentioned the email summarization, which I'm in the pilot. I've been enjoying. Email summarization is nice, but also like the deeper integration into Microsoft Word and into PowerPoint and into kind of a lot of those other tools in the Office suite. And so part of what this pilot is about is because their AI tool inherits a lot of the permissions from the user. There is part of the pilot is to ensure that our internal kind of do an internal audit of what the usage patterns would be, and is our environment ready to have the AI tools deployed in them. So there's just some things that we need to update access controls for and adjust user groups and all those kind of hygiene types of things that get exposed when you provide a new interface to accessing data that's already available. So like that's another piece of the pilot, and also where I see maybe a differentiator for the value of using Copilot the paid version of Copilot over what we're doing with ChatGPT or the free version of Copilot.
Thank you, Josiah. John, go ahead.
You're muted, John.
Miles, I think you gave a really good description of Copilot. This is one of these really interesting, it is so versatile. I mean, the place where I use it the most and my company uses it the most is actually, as part of GitHub, and so if the state has code development, which I know it does, like Chris's area, does this evaluation include that? I mean, it's an incredibly helpful thing for actually doing automation in code management, version control, quality checking, but it's also very good at writing code. And it's, and that's not accidental. And it's the reason that Microsoft is the second most valuable company in the world right now, is because they've worked very closely with ChatGPT. But is that part of the evaluation? And are there any different concerns, more or less? I mean, it's writing code. I guess in some weird thing, you might have a concern that it might slip something into your code that you didn't mean for it to do. But generally, it's, I think, safe. But is that part of your evaluation? So
I really appreciate you bringing that up. That this specific pilot for this specific tool, M365 Copilot, it's actually a discrete tool independent of Copilot for GitHub. There are actually around 50 total tools that Microsoft has created that they call Copilot, which is deeply confusing. But that's all to say that this specific pilot, we're not directly evaluating Copilot for GitHub, but I am discussing getting some Copilot for GitHub trial licenses from the Microsoft team that I think we would likely begin by provisioning to a limited set of developers within ADS, because I've been focused predominantly on evaluating the underlying security and data readiness concerns for Microsoft Copilot, the tool that I mentioned here. And some of the underlying concerns that Josiah mentioned with respect to how this inherits users' delegated permissions. So if their permissions are too broad, that is, raising the risk that Copilot could expose information to them, say from a SharePoint site that has sensitive data that they don't even know that they have access to. But right. Now they've asked Copilot a relevant query and it's determined that site is relevant. So it's exposing that info to them. And the risk profile for Copilot for GitHub, I think is a little bit different in the sense that the types of risks that you mentioned, like potentially injecting problematic or risky elements into code. So that's all to say that that is not explicitly a part of this pilot program, but concurrently that is something that we're going to be evaluating over the next couple months.
That's a good one. Okay, thank you very much.
Josiah?
One quick comment on code related, and again, this pilot is not code related, but there was a really interesting kind of failure mode that some of us heard about this past week, where AI generated code included sample secrets from GitHub, or sorry, from Stack Overflow. And so there were sample secrets in an answer on Stack Overflow that have propagated across large numbers of code bases. And so now, any code that is generated with AI that uses that area, like it looks like a randomly generated secret, but it's the randomly generated secret that someone randomly generated when they posted sample code up on Stack Overflow. So there's some interesting AI related failure modes there. Change your secrets regularly if you're doing that type of stuff is the moral of the story. But I wanted to point out Susanna's comment in the chat. And Susanna, do you mind expanding on that a little bit? I'm interested in exploring that.
Yeah, what I was saying was that, when we were talking about how license distribution would be limited based on the cost, I mean, we know Vermont is a small state with a small budget, at least by comparison. And so scale is important for us. And what I was thinking about was that I can imagine that the evolution of disability justice and disability rights in the workplace will eventually include claims or requests for reasonable accommodation having to do with having access to certain types of AI software or what have you. We already have policies in place that, for example, if someone wants, dragon dictation software that's at a reasonable accommodation, they can have that kind of thing. So I don't see this as being too far off in terms of the evolution of that. And so when we think about what does it mean for something to be either a benefit or asset to your role versus a reasonable accommodation for a disability or what have you, then it would be worth thinking about resource allocation. And I don't know what that means. Maybe people treat it, maybe leadership treats it in a very utilitarian way where they say, okay, well, we're going to earmark a certain number of slots or a certain number of licenses specifically to be used as reasonable accommodations, or we're going to evaluate them based on condition. I mean, that's not within my area of expertise, so I don't want to speculate about what's a correct way to do it. But I do think that if we're thinking about deploying this sort of thing across an organization, and we're not thinking about who sees it as not a benefit but a right, or how far in the future will it start to be seen as a right, not a benefit, then that could it could compound stuff. That was what my comment was.
And then Amanda, do you want to speak to your comment?
I think I was just noting that there is, we have a fiscal responsibility and a governance responsibility. So I know, like at VDH, just because you want something, if you do not have a use for it that you can demonstrate, or, for example, I still don't have Adobe Pro, and I've been with the state for 10 years, but I think I combine a PDF once a month. So why would the state justify me combining a PDF once a month when I can ask my friend to do it? So it's, you have to have a legitimate reason, and then taking in the governance, right? So say you do get it and then you use it 3 times in a year, you shouldn't have it after that, because clearly you're not using something that someone is paying for. So I think people are kind of used to that, I guess, when you work in public service, that just because something new, fancy, and cool came out doesn't mean you're going to get it, because there is limited capacity for funds, and it has to be done in a way that will get the most benefit for Vermonters, not necessarily just state employees.
Great. I know we're getting close to time. I have one item that I wanted to just mention as an announcement. But Miles, I don't know how much is left on the agenda that you wanted to go through.
My last 2 points are less critical for this meeting, so I can roll those over to next month. So I'd be happy to jump over to your announcement.
So the week of the 17th, I'm going to be going down to, and Miles as well, actually, we're going to be going down to Harvard for a public sector AI summit hosted by Civic Roundtable. So a number of other states will be there. We'll be discussing use cases, and I'm excited about that. And then I'm traveling on to state of Georgia to tour, to speak at one of their conferences, and then to tour their AI lab that they've stood up and see how we might be able to emulate that here in Vermont. So I'm excited about those things, and we'll give a report out on where that's at in December's meeting.
So, all right. Well, thank you, Josiah. And those are all of the points that I wanted to cover for today's session. So unless anybody has any additional comments or questions about what we went over, I would be happy to turn it over to public comment before we close. All right, so I will just share my screen again for a closing slide in case anybody has anything.
I'm comfortable that we've waited the requisite number of seconds in silence. But if we are catching anybody, if we're cutting anyone off and you realize that you have a comment you just had to get to the council, then please do use the contact information on the council's website, or if you are on email threads with us, then please do feel free to respond to those. Otherwise, I think that we are okay to close.
I'll motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Obviously.
Aye.
Aye.
I
All right. Have great weekends. And I hope that you all are able to get a little bit of rest. There is a federal holiday next week. So please get some sleep or whatever you people do if you're not working.
excellent.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you all.